Alright, everybody, how we doing today? You ready for this? I'm not sure you are. It's from Ruptly, and it says, GQ magazine's new masculinity is men in makeup and dresses. Oh my god. Let's go. I'm not sure who asked it to, but GQ magazine has used its November issue to redefine the modern man. It's put a bunch of men in makeup and dresses and called it the new masculinity. GQ stands for Gentleman's Quarterly, but gentlemen are a toxic brand in the post-Western and Weinstein world, and just don't sell as many overpriced clothes, watches, and aftershave as they used to. Hence why GQ appears to be trying to distance itself from the gender that's been buying it for decades. GQ is only adding to the confusion because this new masculinity looks a lot like old femininity. And frankly speaking, if anyone at GQ thinks men in makeup is new, then they should go and watch some heavy metal from the 1980s. Yeah, it's a little thing called glam, and real metalheads hate it, because it was a commercial sellout. But no, this is a manifestation of postmodern thinking, and moral relativism, and cultural relativism. Masculinity is not relative, it is absolute. It is an attribute of inherent maleness. And they think that just because sometimes men tend to act a little bit feminine, that's all the proof they need that it's actually relative. Not understanding why that occurs. It's because certain aspects of human nature and that of male nature can be suppressed and can be covered over with a fake persona. Actually, that's how cults work a lot of the time. They bury your true self deep down under a persona of, the cult identity. The same thing can happen. If you feed into your animus, as they say, it will swallow you whole. I'm using a few obscure psychological terms. You may not fully understand what I'm getting at. Basically, if you get in touch with your feminine side without your masculine side being sufficiently developed, this is the result. This is not masculinity at all. GQ editor Will Welch has this message for all those men out there who didn't even know what they needed redefining. He says, new masculinity is very simple. It's I know who I am and respect who you are. Has that cleared everything up for you? Welsh also says traditional notions of masculinity are being challenged. This is the classic view of a man who shares a bubble with the 5% over the 95%. I have absolutely no doubt there are some men who will be grateful that a magazine has given them permission to show off their feminine side. The majority are just trying to watch the football in their pants. Don't get angry, that's just a metaphor. I'm sure some men prefer baseball or rugby. My prediction is the silent majority couldn't care less who wants to wear mascara and frilly pants, one way or the other. Of course, the inference from Welsh and throughout the issue is that until very recently, men have been toxic, destructive animals and should be ashamed of themselves and ask forgiveness. He's essentially defined a new man as being someone who is nice and tolerant, which must mean that the old man, your dad, for example, was none of those things, and does that mean that women who knew who they are and respect others are behaving like men? Like I said, this is a matter of moral and cultural relativism. It's postmodern thinking galore. Do I have to get Jordan Peterson up on this shit? Because you damn bet I will. Only I'm gonna be a bit more angry and use a few old metaphors my grandma used to use. She impacted my speech at a very young age. And she could get very colorful. Without swearing, mind you. You can add a lot of color to your speech without so much as using a single swear word, believe me. But this new concept of toxic masculinity, how supposedly men have always been the oppressor and women have always been the oppressed, and it's just about holding women down, and so on and so forth. Okay, then Why did there exist phrases like women and children first? Why did men compete with one another for the attention of a woman if they were so oppressed, if they weren't valuable? Why did that happen? For that matter, why would a man even bother asking his prospective wife's permission to like get down on one knee and say, "Will you marry me?" if she's so oppressed? This newfangled liberal narrative just does not match up with our cultural heritage and history. It contradicts. It does not make sense. Because this narrative is just that, a narrative. It is made up. Were women historically denied certain rights that only men had? Yes. Does that make them all universally oppressed and all men evil? Absolutely the fuck not. Who gave women the right to vote? Your toxic men. Who gave women the ability to go to an abortion clinic and get an abortion? Your toxic men. Who said women and children first? Your toxic men. You hear that? That's the sound of your narrative crumbling down around you. Because it doesn't match up with reality. It's not. You cannot believe in this stuff and be internally consistent with the reality around you. It's simply not possible. And there's nothing masculine about dresses and makeup. The front cover of GQ has rapper Pharrell in a dress that looks like a sleeping bag inside the magazine. In keeping with the men should be ashamed of themselves theme, Pharrell more or less pleads for forgiveness for the song which pushed him into the big time. It was called Blurred Lines, and the tone of the lyrics and video were distinctly rappy. Distinctly rapey. Some of his earlier lesser-known videos were arguably even worse. But times have changed and Pharrell can see the tide turning. So here he is in GQ on the public altar admitting he was wrong in his lucrative past, but is now a changed man in a dress. Woke won't hurt your back balance either. So does this edition of GQ offer any genuinely useful advice? Well, there's always this gem from comedian Hannah Gadsby, who is also a lesbian. Hello, the men. My advice on modern masculinity would be to look at all those traits you believe are feminine and integrate and interrogate why are you so obsessed with being the opposite. Because this idea that to be a man you have to be the furthest away from being a woman that you possibly can is really weird. Get that, men? Stop just sitting around being obsessed about being men. To answer my previous question, no, this edition of GQ offers absolutely nothing useful, and for God's sake, don't let your granddad see it. Yeah. This is just postmodern thinking on parade. What else could it be, right? And here's the thing. This belief in toxic masculinity. They're just reaching for the low-hanging fruit. They try and prove its existence by deliberately going out of their way to find the worst possible example of masculinity they possibly can. They completely ignore the best example, i.e., the strong, supportive working man who kisses his wife as he leaves the door to go to work every day and literally breaks his back on labor to make sure that his wife and his kids have something to eat at the end of the day. They completely ignore the best example, and then they go straight for the abusive man who beats his wife and shouts and hollers at his kids. And then call that masculinity. That's not masculinity. That's being an asshole. Being a man's not being an asshole. Being a man is being the soldier, the good little fighter, the supporter of the family and tribe who goes out risking life and limb to acquire food and water and shelter. That's what being a man is. Not being a jerk and beating the shit out of your wife. Or just being an asshole and being obsessed with being manly and being all macho. That's what they do. They deliberately reach for the low-hanging fruit, completely bypassing the good example of masculinity, to push this moral relativist narrative, which is about as deceptive as you can possibly get. It's propaganda. It's plain old propaganda. No question about it. Be a real man and stop lying to people. Stop being macho. Stop being an asshole. Be what men were always meant to be. The supporter, the soldier, the doer. Not an asshole. Anyway, peace.